You there, Sarah?
Hello. Yes.
Hello, welcome to the Cornbread Family Hour.
Amazing. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, thanks for being on. So, you're from Long Island, and I hear a lot of like indie pop influences in your work, but it seems like you've had a love for country music for a while that you sort of rediscovered during your time at Syracuse. So, could you walk us through that journey a little bit?
Absolutely. So yeah, I grew up out east on Long Island, and weirdly enough, Long Island does have an affinity for country music and folk music. And right around the time I was in high school, I started songwriting, and I was making more of that music that what I was kind of hearing and stuff on the radio. My parents raised me on Shania Twain and Bruce Springsteen, and those were like my two musical parents. And then when I got to Syracuse, things kind of started, I was being exposed to different influences. Um, at the time, like that's kind of when Lawrence, the band, was coming up, and Sammy Ray and the Friends, and bands like that who were making funk pop music. Um, so I started to dabble in that because that's kind of what my friends were doing in college. And I was like, well, I don't really see a lot of people making country music here, but I really want to make friends and I really want to be involved in the scene. So I started making funk music, or what I thought was funk music at the time.
Was funk just the most popular thing at Syracuse at the time, or what was the jump there?
Kind of. It was the artists that were coming up in the indie scene were using a lot of horn instruments. I was a band nerd myself, so I was very drawn to that. I was involved in the jazz program at Syracuse, so a lot of people were being drawn to that music, pop music with horns, essentially.
Were you a big Wolfpack fan?
I was, yes, and a big Theo Katzman specifically fan, for sure.
Yeah, it seems like a random leap, but I feel like when you have that kind of musical background, sometimes you need to scratch that itch just because once you study jazz and funk and those genres, you can kind of go back and tackle any other project with that framework, right?
Yes, for sure. I think that I found so many similarities when I was studying jazz in college with jazz and bluegrass and country music. And I think that sometimes we put them in little boxes, like super far away from each other. I don't know. I think there's a lot more overlap than we give it credit for.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up Long Island having an affinity for country music because I feel like that's one of the things that's misunderstood about New York, not just with like Long Island and upstate kind of being more rural and maybe having more country influences, but also in New York City itself. I feel like the city in Brooklyn specifically has kind of a history with country music, Ramblin' Jack Elliott and the rodeo in Madison Square Garden that people don't really think of.
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah, I think that it's kind of like anywhere, you really kind of got to find your people and find that community. And there's, a niche for everyone. And especially in New York City, I think it's a good time to be a folk artist in New York City right now because there's a lot of venues popping up with that concentration in Americana and folk music. And I think people are just really trying to connect with lyrics and find other people who feel that way. I feel like there's a sense of community in folk music that I really love, especially in New York City.
Right. So you said that you originally had gotten into funk to try to find that community in college and, make friends and not just be like a country weirdo in the corner.
Yes.
But you came back around full circle to country music. So was that a way of expressing more individualism, or were you able to find a community of like-minded people?
Kind of both. I think really the switch happened right around the pandemic when I realized that the music that I was going to for comfort in that time was folk music and country music. I was studying a lot of artists like Bob Dylan and Paul Simon and Linda Ronstadt, Carole King, just those, big songwriters of the 70s and 80s, and Joni Mitchell. I was just like, what is it about these artists that are making them good songwriters? And I was so interested in their process and their styles and how to create a persona through lyricism and songwriting. And that started to lead me to making country music, because that was really what I was intaking into that time.
What do you think it is about the pandemic that made you want to listen to that stuff? Just because you had more time to dive into it, or was there a certain theme of isolation that drew you to that sound?
Definitely. I feel like in the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, oh, okay, I have a lot of time to write songs and whatever. And I remember making more of that funk pop sound. And I wasn't, and it just felt a little disconnected for me because it was too happy. It was too upbeat for me at that time. And I think that I myself just wasn't connecting with that music anymore. Maybe I had just grown out of that sound. I don't really know, but like I think I was searching to make music that was for me and not for anybody else anymore. And I think that's kind of where that switch happened, and where that realization of, oh, Sarah Gross, and maybe I'm not meant to make this music because I'm making it for other people because that's what I think they're going to like, but it's not actually the music that I make best, if that makes any sense.
Right. And there's kind of a weird paradox there where a lot of times when you try to make stuff for other people that you think they'll like, it's not as popular as if, when you just make something for yourself. Ironically, that's when other people can relate to it more because it's more personal, or it's a more true expression of where your head is at that time.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
It's interesting you say that about the pandemic, though, because I had kind of a similar experience, just going through like isolation in the pandemic and breakup of a longer term relationship. And I think that like the lyrics in country music are just like, there's so many heartbreaking songs, but for some reason at that time, like nothing else could really hit emotionally quite like a lot of the old school stuff, really like outlaw country music. So
Yes.
it's interesting. I wonder if other people had that experience too, because I feel like there's been kind of a country cowboy revival amongst our generation, like in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I agree for sure. I think the twang is definitely back, and I'm here for it. I feel like, it's nice to see people kind of realizing that there is country music being made that isn't the mainstream pop stuff that we hear on the radio. And I think it has a lot to do with identity. I feel like people were disconnected with country music for a while because if you said, I like country music, I think people made a lot of assumptions about who you were as a person.
Hmm.
And I think now with this indie country or indie twang, whatever you call it, I think that there is a different identity attached to it. So it's really interesting.
Definitely. I've heard people call it the liberal mullet music.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I was actually going to ask you about that because I noticed that you use labels like queer country music a lot when promoting your music, or you have a playlist called Country Music is Queer.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about what that relationship is and what it means to you?
Yes. It's so interesting. I feel like when you look at outlaw country and the country music that, golden country is kind of what we called it in like the 70s and 80s and maybe even earlier. Country music is a revolution, and people are angry, and people were making very political songs that went against the grain. You may have heard of Lavender Country. I think they're unfortunately the lead singer had just passed away pretty recently, but I think they were probably the first queer country artist ever, like, or at least like publicly. And I feel like the more I learned about country music and, Americana specifically being made many years ago, 50 years ago, I think that what they're saying actually has a lot of weight today, and especially in the queer community. And I think it all just kind of boiled down to people were just like, mind your damn business. Like, let me live my life. And they were also very, very angry back then at how people, the working class, are being treated. And I think that's kind of where this outlaw country revival may come into play. So I feel like queer country music almost sounds like a paradox, or it's an oxymoron, if you will, because at least in this day and age, because um I don't think that people thought you could be queer and be a country artist, and people are standing up and saying no. Country music is supposed to be inclusive. It's supposed to be for all people. And you know, there's always been queer artists, but we're done being silenced.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that group. You yourself identify as queer or bisexual?
Yes. Yeah, I just call myself queer because it's a journey. We're all figuring it out.
It's a spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like 2005 there was kind of a revival in that area as well with Brokeback Mountain coming out, and
Hmm.
Willie Nelson had that great song. What is it? Cowboys are frequently secretly fond of each other. Yeah,
Yes, yes,
I always mess that
exactly.
up. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a great one. And that's kind of I've seen that pop up on, certain like queer country, alt country niches on TikTok in the last couple of years, which is cool to see.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about that too. So, you've had some success promoting your music on TikTok, to say the least. I mean, you have substantial following there. I think it's about 18,000 last I checked. You had one video get over 1 million hits. So, could you talk a little bit about the role that TikTok has played in promoting your music and what that's changed for you?
Yeah, I mean, TikTok, I think is, it could mean a lot for smaller artists like myself. I think it's just a chance. I think it's a way to connect with people that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to. Um, I mean, not only has it been able to reach local listeners for me, people who live in New York or maybe just kind of in the Northeast region of America, but I think it's also been able to reach people all across the country where I'm not going to be touring in, Utah or Los Angeles right now. So, I mean, maybe one day, but it's really cool that there is a platform that can facilitate that process for me being able to expand to people who you really have no idea where they're coming from and where they're watching from. So yeah, it's been really fun to meet new people and new collaborators even. I feel like I've worked with a lot of people just that I've met through TikTok, and that's been a really great experience.
And these people have worked on the production side or like played instruments on your tracks?
Sometimes, so I think there's a couple of people that I found, like a steel guitar player that I found on TikTok who I'll be working with. And um remote recording kind of came up during the pandemic. So finding people through that has been really great as a producer. But even like just in the songwriting realm, I feel like I didn't really do a lot of co-writing with people until the pandemic hit, and I was discovering artists like myself on TikTok, and then we would reach out to each other and get a writing session going.
That's great. Yeah, I feel like those pedal steel guys especially get a lot of work
Yes.
since, as we talked about, there's this twang revival, and it's kind of a somewhat obscure instrument. Not a lot of people have it or play it. So
Yeah, yeah.
you've played out a lot in your life, I guess specifically in the Northeast, but you've been playing gigs, it seems like basically your whole life or since you were a teenager. So what do you feel like it is about these live shows that brings out something that isn't there on the records.
Yeah. I've been playing forever. It started with coffee shop gigs. I started playing solo when I was around 15 or 16. And that's still kind of what I do for a living, is playing those cover gigs. And I think that that helped me cut my teeth on the guitar and playing my songs, test driving these songs and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And it also helped me develop kind of an onstage persona and just be comfortable talking to an audience, even when no one is listening in these restaurants or these breweries and stuff like that. But I think at some point you kind of are just like itching. You're like, I don't want to be playing other people's songs. I want to be playing my songs. So I think by the time I get on a stage where I am playing all original music, it's it's a gift for me. I find it as a privilege. And then when I get to play with a band, it's just so much fun. I think that the pandemic has taught me a lot about making music with others is a privilege. It's not always given. And I just feel like music is better in collaboration. So I love touring with my band and playing with them. And I feel like the songs themselves kind of live a different life when they're being performed live rather than being played on the record. I think we try and give people a different experience when they're paying a ticket and they're coming to see us live than what you're going to hear when you play it on your phone or something.
Definitely. Well, I noticed that you've been playing a lot more with this band recently. I feel like, in terms of the collaboration of music, even just playing live, whether it's a concert in a room somewhere, there's some kind of spiritual connection that people can have when it's really clicking. And you hear stories in country music of people having some telepathic connection or, like being blood brothers because they've played together so long.
Yes.
So there's definitely something deeper there.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk specifically about some of your songs. The first one I wanted to talk about was Amy, because that was the first one I saw from you. I believe I saw it through TikTok. That was the one that got over 1 million hits. And you were talking about how you titled the song Amy because you wanted her to know it's about her. So
Yeah.
my question was, like, in your songwriting, you tend to go pretty specific about details, and that one specifically, but do you ever have any hesitation in talking about specific life experiences and people?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think sometimes my songs, if you know me personally, it's kind of like a guessing game because they're like, "Oh, did you just make this up or is this like a real thing that happened to you?" And sometimes I like that. I kind of like that. Sometimes people just never know.
Mystique.
Um, but in that song specifically, I was definitely nervous. That was a personal experience that did happen to me in real life, which I've talked about before. Yeah, I wasn't really sure if I was going to release that song or not, but I really loved it and I was super proud of it. And at the end of the day, wait, can I curse on this?
Of course.
Okay.
Fuck, shit, fuck.
Okay. At the end of the day, if you don't want a song written about you, don't fuck over a songwriter. Like, what? That's just logic to me. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to tell you not to journal about your personal experience. This is how I journal about mine. This is how I, you know, can comprehend things emotionally, is by songwriting sometimes. And yeah, I mean, tough shit. That's how I feel.
Yeah, no, I think it's brave to be able to talk about specific experiences like that because it's certainly something I deal with a lot as an artist. Even when I've made stuff that isn't about people, people will sometimes think it's about them and, project and try to psychoanalyze because
Yeah.
you're writing, and that gets kind of annoying. Like you said, I think for most people it's an amalgamation of like taking on characters, life experiences.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear back from Amy about that song?
No, but she did unfollow me on Instagram directly after that. Yeah, I haven't heard from her since.
Wow, she was following you at the time. That's
She was. Yeah, no, she never said anything. And you know what? I respect her for that.
yeah, I love that song. Another one I really love is Brooklyn Only Rains.
Oh, yay.
I noticed that you have a lot of titles between that one, Morningside, Riversides, Arizona, Osprey Park, that are about specific places.
Yes.
So, what do you think it is about these places that hold memories and evoke inspiration from you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I my physical space is so important to me. And I don't know if this is something that other people feel, but even just like my apartment, my bedroom, the places that I spend a lot of time in, I'm a very nostalgic person, and I will definitely attach a lot of those memories to those places. And I don't know. I feel like physical space can really affect our mood. It can affect our state of mind, and I think that's kind of why I get so inspired to write songs that are like hyper specific to one place, or maybe title them, because that's kind of me gaining a little bit of closure from when I leave those places.
I like that. Well, I'm Morningside. I'm assuming is Morningside Heights and Riverside is Riverside Park, or am I projecting that?
No, so Morningside is just kind of a place that I made up, but
Mm.
or just like kind of a word that I had made up. But in the song, it'll say, I didn't really put this out when I was living there, but I grew up on a street called Riverside.
Different from Riverside Ave in Manhattan and like Riverside Park. This is in Long Island.
Yes. This is in Long Island, in, the place that I grew up. And it was right on the water, and I feel very connected to, the ocean and water, just being from Long Island. So that's kind of where the inspiration for that EP title came from. Because that kind of capped my living at home, because I knew that I was going to move somewhere else when I graduated college, but I wasn't quite sure. And I was very, I guess, emotional about having to leave my childhood home at some point, and knowing that that had an end to it, and that I wasn't always going to be there. So I think that's where a lot of those songs came from, was just that, knowing that in the back of my mind, that home, you'll always have home to come back to, but it's a temporary place.
I wanted to ask you one more question about Amy, circling back to that.
Cool.
So I feel like that song has such a unique cadence. There's some kind of like borrowed time where like one line kind of leads into the next,
Yeah.
and then you subvert that one time when it sounds like you're going to say jerk, right? And then you switch it up.
Yes.
So where did the inspiration for that cadence come from? Because I can't think of another song where I've heard something like that.
Yeah, I don't really know. I think it was kind of right around that time, and I was listening to a lot of Bob Dylan, and Casey Musgraves actually does this too, where they both just have a lot of fun with wordplay.
Space Cowboy.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. If you look closely at her music, you will find so much clever, turns of phrases and wordplay, that it's just like God damn it, why didn't I think of that?
She's great.
She's great with that. And when I was writing this song, it's kind of just started to happen naturally, but I just started to kind of like make them lead one into the next. And I was like, I wonder how far this thing can go. Like, I wonder how much I can really stretch this in the verses. And then, oh, you act like such a jerk thing was kind of an accident, because I was like, I don't know how to make jerk lead into the next line, but I can make it sound like something else. And I think that might be really cool.
And then you said jealousy.
Yes.
It works well with the first part of that word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that song about a dozen times now, and it still gets me like every time I'm like singing along to it, and I forget the switch up. Yeah, it's great.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That's very validating.
Going back to Brooklyn Only Rains, is there anything about the process of that song, specifically with the songwriting and lyrics, that a story that's underneath the surface that people might not know just from listening to it?
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely a story. So, Brooklyn Only Rains was written on the last day of my internship at a recording studio in Brooklyn. And I noticed this pattern where literally every time I went to Brooklyn, it was pouring rain and I was never prepared. I always, actually, the studio that I was at had a wall of leftover umbrellas because it was such a common thing that people would actually have to like go and buy an umbrella and leave it at the studio because they were touring artists and no one ever came prepared. So it was kind of unique to that experience where it just felt like I never really knew it was coming. And I was just about to enter my senior year of college and the internship wasn't great. Felt like I was just kind of being tossed into the background of things, and I was dealing with learning about studio culture. And at the time, I had just assumed when I graduated college that I would be like working in recording studios for a living and kind of doing that hustle and that grind. And as much as I loved being around other musicians and being around audio gear and stuff like that, I think I just took away the experience of being like, I don't think that that's really what I want in my life. But if it's not that, then what is it going to be? So I felt like I had a lot of time to think to myself on the Long Island Railroad every day. And with that time, I was just kind of going over and over in my head, what is it that I want? Why is this experience not clicking for me? And I felt a lot of self-doubt and a lot of imposter syndrome. And that's kind of where the song came from. Just being like, I don't know how this is going to end, but I have to trust that it's all going to happen the way it's supposed to. And I'm just going to put my faith into the universe that it's going to work out. Yeah, that's kind of what that song is about. And I really love it. I just wanted to, and I was very inspired by the New York folk scene and feeling like I was a folk singer in the 70s playing in Greenwich Village or something like that.
It has a good quality of being about something literally, like descriptive.
Mhm.
I think a lot of times with songwriting, the best songs can come from an observation or a description of real life that takes on a new meaning once you explore it further.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like I crave that double meaning and the complexity.
I wanted to ask you about some of your work on the other side as doing production, mixing, and mastering, because that's something that you do for other people too. One song that you recently did that I really liked for Victoria Said was "Hope You Don't Sleep Good Tonight."
Oh my gosh. Yay.
Yeah, I well, I think it's catchy, but it kind of blew me away when I first heard it, just because like the staccato glitch effect during the chorus
Mm.
was something that was so unique. It kind of had that Tame Impala effect where I thought my computer was broken. I had to check it, and I was like, "Oh wow,
That's
that's
awesome.
different. That's cool." And then there were some high synths towards the end too that were really different and unexpected. A lot of genre blending production choices. So, what was the inspiration behind producing that track?
Word. I'm so glad that you listened to that and that you liked it. Yeah, Victoria is an artist that I've been working with for a few months now, and she's one of the first clients I've ever really had where someone was, fully trusting me with their music. And I think that that song specifically, she had come to me, just kind of with an idea of guitar and vocals.
What do you mean by that? Do people normally kick back and try to push their way through and ignore your input?
No, it depends. I mean, I've just been very blessed to work with people who I get along with very well and we work well together. And every artist kind of has a different vision for their music. And I think this one was just so intimate and so sacred to her that we were just trying to find a way to incorporate. She really loved like the Rex Orange County sound,
Mm.
and lots of like Charlie Berg too. So we were kind of pulling some inspiration from that like indie R&B sound. And then I just love guitar layering. I think that was something that I was exploring with a lot, because I was right around the time where I was working on my record. I was just like, with one guitar, how many things can I do? So that's kind of what we were working with too. And yeah, I think with her pop R&B sound and my folk country sound, I think we were able to just blend it together and make something unique to the two of us.
I wanted to ask you more generally, how does your creative approach differ when you're working on someone else's song versus your own?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I love working with other people because I think I am more inclined to take risks when it comes to production, or just get outside of my comfort zone, than I would be when I'm working on my own music. And that was a big struggle that I had with this project that I'm working on now. I think that when I'm working with those other people, it's almost like a mirror. And I feel like I can see how, especially artists that have maybe never really recorded music before, seeing kind of that experience and learning the power of their own voice and getting comfortable in front of a microphone, all of these things that I think I may have forgotten about for a long time. It's been really a pleasure and an honor to like work with those artists from the ground up. And it reminds me when I go back into the studio, and I remind myself that this is supposed to be fun, and this is supposed to be, me stretching the boundaries for my own music and never, settling, because I would never do that to my clients. So if I can't be confident with my own music and my own production recording myself, how am I going to give that to people that want to trust me with their music? So it's been a really amazing journey getting to work with those artists, because they teach me a lot. And that producer artist relationship is very important. And I think it has been a reminder to myself when I record my own music to give yourself a lot of grace, and to, always make sure your music is going to sound the best that it can.
It's great that for this track, it sounded like Victoria was giving you a lot of creative freedom and flexibility to experiment with the sounds, and it obviously works well.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been working on a lot of new music, and I'm really excited about the next couple of songs that she's going to be releasing this summer. So stay tuned, because there's a lot coming from Victoria said.
Cool. I wanted to ask you also about your new song, Naturally. So I noticed that you said this is the start of a new era for you, and I'm assuming that means album release cycle.
Yes.
What sort of stylistic changes are you hoping to express with this new batch of songs?
Yeah, I feel like what you're going to find on this new record is I really wanted to experiment with my production style. And a lot of that, I've never really had a lot of electronic sounds on my songs before. So I think with this project, I have a lot of synths on it, and but still kind of keeping the country roots of it and the folk music as the main inspiration. But I just think it's so cool when you have music that is familiar and it still feels human and it still feels acoustic, because I think our brains are literally like programmed to hear an acoustic instrument and recognize it and just feel connected to it. But also to have the, modern production layering into it kind of as a support. I think it's just really fun. I think that there's a lot that we can do in this genre of music. And that's what I wanted to challenge myself with this project.
Do you have a title or release date for the album yet?
Yes. The album is going to be called The Killjoy. and it's going to be released sometime in August.
For Naturally, was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process for making this song. So you said you've been trying to blend some of these classic acoustic country sounds with more electronic stuff, and it sounds like you've gotten into a lot of like vocal and guitar layering. But in terms of like songwriting and production, what was the process for making this?
Yeah, this song has been such a journey. I started it in 2020 when I had literally just finished the book Call Me by Your Name, and I didn't know that I was gay yet. So it just really hit home for me, and I wasn't sure quite why. But then I just immediately started writing this song, and it took a lot of different life forms up until this point. I had it as a very slow acoustic, very songwriter song. And then I brought it to the band, and then it started to become this more like indie pop disco kind of song when I was in college. And but it just never sat right for some reason. It just never, as a band, I felt like I would bring a lot of my songs to my band in college, and we would work out a lot of these arrangements together. And then we would record them after we've performed it and, test drove it a little bit. And it just never really got there for some reason. And then it wasn't until this past fall, I worked with a friend of mine. His name is Dan Harris, and he's also a part of a project called Shallow Alcove, and he's a phenomenal producer. And we both went to Q's together, and it really wasn't until this fall that we started, writing a couple songs together. And I brought him this song. I think what it took was we literally flipped it on its head, and we made this like tortured cowboy slow swung version of this song. I ended up having to change the verses so that they were less wordy and that they kind of fit into this new groove. And so I do have that version of the song. And then I was like, well, what if I brought it back up to tempo like I was doing with the other ones, and kind of kept it as this like Fleetwood Mac-esque song? And that's really when it clicked for me, was when I was able to bring that new arrangement to the original, drum beat of the song. It really has been a process. And then when I was home, I started just like kind of messing around and just creating like a little demo of it. And then I was like, oh shit, this is pretty good. I guess I'm gonna just kind of keep expanding on this and working on it. I came up with something that I really loved. And then I brought in a couple of players to play drums, bass, and I had my friend Jackson play slide guitar on it. And that's where it came to be.
A lot of times the best songs come from when you put it on the back burner for a while and have time to sit and think about it and rework it into different styles, which it sounds like you've done, which, for some people it could feel like, oh, I've just, wasted my time doing all these versions that aren't going to work. But it sounds like you were able to take the best parts from each reworking and incorporate it into the final version.
Yeah. Some songs just come together very easily, and you can visualize it in an instant. And other songs just need to be lived in for a little while. And I think that's definitely what happened with this song.
So, what's your relationship like with your band? This is your backing band for live shows? Are these people you've worked with for a while?
Yes. A lot of them came from Syracuse, and some of them actually are people that I've been working with on Long Island. And now we have all graduated, and we're starting to move at least a little bit closer together. So I've been bringing all of this music to that band, and I'm really lucky that I get to still work with them even after college.
Did they play on the live records at all, or is that just you playing?
Some of them, yeah. My drummer, Nick Balzano, has been the drummer that I've used for all of my recordings. And then I even, on some of this music, I had my drummer from upstate. His name is Ian Yates, and he was able to play a few songs on it. It was interesting with this record, The Killjoy, that's coming up in a couple of months. A lot of these songs were tracked in Woodstock while we were on tour. And that was with myself, Delaney Hafner on bass and vocals, Nick Petta on keys and vocals, Jackson Masters on guitar and Ian Yates on drums. While we were touring through upstate, I met up with a friend of mine, Jill with the G is her artist name, and she worked at Dreamland Studios. So we weren't planning on recording there. We were recording at a different studio that her boss, it was kind of her boss's quote home studio, but it was a very glorified home studio. By the grace of God, something wasn't working in that studio that day that we were recording, and it just so happened that nobody was in Dreamland, which is a very historic studio in Woodstock that Sufjan Stevens and Regina Spektor, a lot of Americana folk artists of today are coming through. And it just so happened to be open that day and nobody was using it. So we kind of snuck our way over into Dreamland and we tracked the whole album live together in the same room. So I was able to take that and expand on it for a lot of these songs. And I think that you'll hear a relationship between the bands in a lot of these songs. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have a band that connected really well with each other. And we have been, touring these songs and playing these songs forever. So it worked out really well.
Yeah, recording in Woodstock there is poetic. That's great that you had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a cool story.
What's something people would be surprised to learn about you?
I don't know. In a music sense or in a like personable sense?
Just in general.
In general. I think that my artist persona comes across as very outgoing and very rock and roll, and like I want to stay up until 3 a.m. every day. But I do feel like I am quite introverted and quite in my head a lot. I feel like I do appreciate my alone time maybe more than the average person.
Social battery recharge.
Yeah, oh yeah. And I feel like I'll do gigs and then I personally don't understand how like people can play a show and then be like, let's party after I finish the show.
That was the party.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, I just poured out all of my trauma to all of these strangers. I'm gonna need a minute to, reboot.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
And I think people are surprised to hear about that experience for me.
Yeah, well, that's one of the interesting dichotomies of specifically being a musician is I feel like it takes a certain kind of extroversion to be able to play live and be charismatic and put yourself out there and get people interested in your music. But also to be able to write songs, it requires introversion, it requires alone time and thinking time. And so it's a interesting balance between those. I think a lot of people compartmentalize those two parts of their lives by creating an artistic persona, having a stage name and considering that being something different than themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you use your birth name, I'm assuming, as your stage name.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't pick that out of thin air.
Was there just randomly sort of gross? You never know there's so many stage names. Winona Judd was a random, like she just made that up.
Mhm.
Travis Scott is another. People pick random names, but was there ever any consideration to have a stage name as a means of compartmentalizing that, or do you like that it overlaps into personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, I always just assumed that I would just go by my middle name when I started doing my artist project, which is Sarah Jane. I don't know. Then I got to college and then people just were like, "Oh, Sarah Gross Music. Like that's your name." I'm like, "Oh yeah, I guess that is my name."
Was that your Instagram handle at the time or something?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think people were just like it just, kind of like rolls off the tongue. It's like, "Oh, there's Sarah Gross Music." And I don't know why, but it just stuck. And then I got verified on Instagram and I was like, oh shit, now I really can't change it. So I'm too nervous to change it now.
Well, there's like a name recognition thing too.
Yeah, I started to embrace it once I realized that no one else had it. And maybe there's a reason why nobody else would willingly choose that name. I feel like it's just who I am. I don't know. I think I'll be sour gross music for a long time.
It's an existing word, so it sounds like something that might be invented.
Yeah.
You know, it makes it even more poetic that you just get to use your actual name.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on AI covers and the relationship of AI and art?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I hope it doesn't put me out of a job. That's my first thought as a mix engineer.
Hmm.
Like I saw something this morning that was like Michael Jackson AI cover of Versace on the floor. And in a way, I was kind of like, wow, how did like it is mind-blowing that they're able to create the inflection of a person and their sound and capture something that like, yeah, that really is how Michael Jackson would sing that song. You're kind of almost like, wow, how lucky are we that we can kind of hear that? Then it's a weird like mind fuck moment. We're like, oh, we weren't supposed to hear that. Like maybe there are just some things that we don't need to exist in the void and can be left up to interpretation and imagination. Yeah, I mean, I'm not too worried about AI taking over the music industry because I think we as people can recognize when things are disingenuine. Even when humans are singing it, you can tell when someone's just writing a song or just when you're listening to a song, you're like, this isn't real. Like this is just, I don't know, the kind of a cop out or whatever. And I don't think that's what people are looking for in music. I like to imagine that people who listen to music are there to experience something and be a part of something and not to just get a quick fix. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just holding out hope that people are attached to the humanness of music.
Well, and especially in your genre and folk singer-songwriter music, you know, it's very personal and very human and unique in that way. Um, but I share similar complicated feelings about AI. Honestly, I think it'd be cool if it just stayed in this like kitschy early development stage where
Hmm.
it just was like a little bit off, you know, because the kind of the big argument is like, oh, well, it looks cheesy now, but wait till like 10 years, it's going to be crazy,
Mm.
which I'm sure is true. But, you know, as a relic of this time, I like the unsettling album art.
Yeah.
So Lil Yachty did that on his last album cover. It was just AI faces, just creepy.
Yeah. I don't know how people can truly feel connected to that, but who knows?
So you mentioned, I'm just gonna wrap up here. You mentioned you have this album coming out in August. You're continuing to work on other people's projects. So what's your primary goal right now with your music, and what can people expect in the future from Sarah Gross music?
I am really excited to get this album out in the world. I'm spending the next couple of months really just wrapping up the mixing process and mastering process with Shane Patterson and Gabby Grella, who are going to be mixing and mastering this project. And I am just hoping that this will lead to maybe more touring opportunities and more performing opportunities. I think this album is meant to be played live, and I'm really excited to get to do that, especially when people can hear it and connect with it. And yeah, I think that this is going to be a really fun summer. There's going to be singles coming out every month until the album is released. There's going to be some music videos, which is really exciting, and lots of shows for sure.
Do you have any specific goals in terms of touring or numbers? Like, oh, once I play in Lubbock, Texas, that's when I know I'll made it as a country artist or something like that.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like this part of my career has been really fun because I have nothing to lose and everything to prove. So I feel like I just kind of take it day by day because I'm constantly playing to new audiences, especially opening for other people. That's been a really big goal of mine, like in the immediate future, is getting to open for artists that I admire and then stealing all of their fans. That would be great. Yeah, I feel like I have been loving this part where nobody really knows me, but at the end of the show, they're like, "Oh, like I wasn't expecting to see an opener and feel like I actually connected with their music. So I think that's kind of my goal right now is just to meet new people and try some of these songs out and hope that they connect with someone.
Great. Well, I've been lucky enough to be a Sarah Gross music fan for a couple months now, and even just in that short window of time, I've seen you come out with some new stuff and grow your audience. So it's really great to see.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me, Sarah.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.